This is Greek with David Hutchison. Present middle and passive indicative. We're starting to work on passive voice today. Now, so far, all the forms that we've learned were active voice. Active voice means that the subject is performing the action, such as I am reading the book. The subject is I, and it's doing the action of the verb, it's doing the reading, or I am hitting the ball. So active voice means that the subject performs the action. Passive voice means that the subject receives the action of the verb. The subject is acted upon. I am being hit by my neighbor. The subject is I. The passive verb am being hit tells you that the subject is acted upon. Or, I am being saved by the Lord. Both of these are examples of passive voice. We're going to use some new endings for passive voice. I call these the number 3 endings. These endings are actually the primary middle and passive endings, but we'll refer to them in shorthand as the number 3 endings. My, aersai, tai, metha, sthe, intai. My, aersai, tai, metha, sthe, intai. The key to the present, middle, or passive indicative is number 3 endings. Just like when we had present active indicative and we had one main key, it was the number 1 endings. Here on present, middle, or passive indicative, we only have one main key, it's the number 3 endings. So there's a lot of parallels between the present active and then the present, middle, or passive. So how are we going to form the present, middle, or passive? We're going to use the present stem, just like we did on present active. We're going to use connecting vowels, just like we did on present active. And then we're going to use number 3 endings. These are the primary, middle, or passive endings. So the pattern is exactly the same. So here's what the paradigm would look like. Luamai, lue, luitai, luamatha, luisthe, luentai. So let's look. Here's our stem, lu, that's the present stem. We have connecting vowel, omicron there, epsilon there, omicron, epsilon, omicron. Then we have our endings. My, aersai, tai, methus, the, entai. You would translate it, I am being loosed, you are being loosed, he, she, or it is being loosed, we are being loosed, you are being loosed, they are being loosed. Now look again at the second singular form, lue. We said the endings were my, aersai, tai. What's actually going on in the second singular form? What you're going to see for the next several lessons is that second singular forms are just weird. What actually happened with the psi ending? Originally it was Lewis psi. That sigma dropped out. So we're left with the epsilon bumping into the alpha. When that happens, the epsilon and alpha can combine to form a new letter. So they combined to form an eta. And then we have this iota hanging out at the end. Well, the iota subscripted. It went below the script. Remember, a submarine goes below the water, and an iota subscript goes below the script, below the writing. So that's why we have the A ending there. The pure endings are my, psi, tai, methus, the, entai, but we've added A on the second singular to help you memorize it, because you will actually see this change happen very often. So my, psi, tai, methus, the, entai, but in actuality, it often turns out to my, a, tai, methus, the, entai. So with a passive verb, the subject is acted upon. Well, one question you want to know is the famous whodunit question. Who was the one who did the action? So what passive verbs will often have nearby them is what we would call an agency phrase. It's a prepositional phrase that tells us who performed the action. One type of phrase like this begins with the preposition hupa. This tells us the direct agent or the ultimate agent. This is the one who's ultimately responsible for the action. Hupa. Dia, if a prepositional phrase begins with dia, it expresses intermediate agency. Not the ultimate agent, not the direct agent, but the intermediate agent. And then you can have in, the preposition in, which can express impersonal agency. Not a personal agent, but the impersonal means by which something is accomplished. So you have these agency phrases, hupa, dia, or in. Hupa, dia, or in. You can also do this just with a plain dative without any prepositional phrase. That would be one of the ways to express impersonal agency as well. We're also talking about the middle voice. With active voice, we said the subject is performing the action. With passive voice, the subject is acted upon. With middle voice, there is special involvement of the subject in the action of the verb. Special involvement of the subject in the action of the verb. Here's the idea with a few different translation options. I am loosing myself. I am loosing for myself. I myself am loosing. So again, the middle voice expresses special involvement of the subject in the verb. It could have the idea, I am loosing myself, I am loosing for myself, or I myself am loosing. As you can probably guess, how are you going to know which translation is best? Context. What you do is you try all the different options. You see how they fit into the context of the clause and the sentence and the surrounding sentences, and then you come up with your best option. So how will you form the present middle indicative? Well, here's some good news. You already did it. It's the exact same form as the present passive indicative. In fact, if you noticed at the top of the screen a moment ago, when we went over that form, it said present middle / passive indicative. That's why, because it's the exact same form as the present passive indicative. So what would the key be? Well, we would say the key would be, again, the number 3 endings. My, aer, psi, tai, methus, the, entai. My, aer, psi, tai, methus, the, entai. So here's what it looks like once again. Luamai, lue, luetai, luamatha, luesthe, luentai. So how would you translate it? Well, once again, the middle expresses special involvement of the subject in the action of the verb. So here are 3 basic options. I am loosing myself. I am loosing for myself. I myself am loosing. And how are you going to know which one to choose? Context. So if we've got a form that could be middle or it could be passive, how are you going to know which one to choose? Well, you are already learning by now the answer to that question is going to be context. But let me give you some help on what context means with these. For one thing, there are more passive verbs in the New Testament than middle verbs. So, first option, try passive. And remember, a passive verb will often occur with an agency phrase. This is that prepositional phrase beginning with hupa or dia or in, telling you who performed the action of the verb. And so if you see that agency phrase, the verb is probably passive. Remember, hupa, dia, or in. Another hint, a passive verb will almost never have a direct object. I am being hit. It's hard for that to take a direct object. It is possible with some verbs. I am being called teacher, so that could work. But more often than not, it's hard for a passive verb to take a direct object. So, what are you going to do? You see a form. It could be middle, could be passive. It's the exact same form. You're going to try passive first because there are more passives than middles in the New Testament. If you see an agency phrase, you see hupa, dia, or in beginning that phrase, it's probably passive. If you see a direct object, an accusative direct object, it's probably middle. How are we going to parse these forms? In the voice column, where you put active or middle or passive, what you're going to do is you're going to decide from context, is this verb middle or is this verb passive? And that's the answer you're going to put. So if it's middle, you'll say present middle indicative. If it's passive, you'll say present passive indicative. Why don't you put both? Well, because in context, we know which one it is. And so you parse it just like you translated it. Now, what if you were doing just a plain old parsing test? I don't do these, but some professors do. So let's just say you had a blank piece of paper, no context, all you had was a verb, and you knew it was either middle or passive. Well, then in that case, you put present middle / passive. But in context, which is how I like to do things, you're going to make a decision, so you'll just put what the answer actually is. Now to deponents. This is a new word for you. A deponent verb is a verb that is middle or passive in form, but active in meaning. It's middle or passive in form, but it's active in meaning. So it looks middle passive, but how do you translate it? You translate it as active. How do you know a verb is deponent? Well, one simple clue. If the lexical form, if the vocab form, the dictionary form, ends in oh my, then the form is a deponent. It ends in oh my, it's a deponent. Middle or passive in form, but active in meaning. As you're studying for vocab, if you memorize an oh my verb, you know it's a deponent. So here's a verb that's a deponent. It's ginomai, a very common verb. It can mean I am or I become. There's no active form on this tense. Ginomai, gine, ginetai, ginomatha, ginesthe, ginuntai. It looks middle passive, but how do you translate it? You translate it as active. So how would that look? I become, you become, he, she, or it becomes, we become, you become, they become. You translate it just as if it were an active verb, not as if it were middle or passive. Another very common deponent is erchomai. Erchomai means I come or I go. Particularly in the Gospels and in Acts, we would expect to see this verb a lot. Erchomai, erche, erchetai, erchomatha, erchesthe, erchantai. My, ersaitai, methasthe, entai. I come or go, you come or go, he, she, or it comes or goes, we come or go, you come or go, they come or go. Now this verb erchomai, you could add a lot of prepositional prefixes to it. You could go in, you could eis erchomai, you could go out, you could ex erchomai, you could go up, you could go down. Be familiar with this verb just because it's so common, and when it's a compound verb, a verb with a prepositional prefix, it's also so common. So you will translate a deponent as if it were active, and when you parse it, you'll put deponent in the voice column. So where you would put middle or passive, go ahead and just put deponent. If you want a really solid practice, what you could put is middle/passive deponent. And the reason I'll say that is because later on, we will have some forms that are only middle or only passive. And so in that case, what you could say is something middle deponent, something passive deponent. So best practice would be, for now, middle/passive deponent, but if you want to, just go ahead and put deponent. I will accept either one. There is an emerging perspective on deponency. In fact, some scholars argue so strongly for their perspective that they once had a session at an annual meeting of the SBL called "We Killed Deponency." So now what? Well, these scholars are arguing against the concept of deponency. What they're saying is these verbs are not deponent. Instead, they're actually just true middles. You might call them middle-only verbs. Yes, they don't have an active form, but who said they had to? They just have a middle form, so they're middle-only verbs. So we shouldn't call them deponents. We should simply call them middle. For a lot of words, this does work, and they may be onto something here. So what I would suggest is if a verb could be middle or passive, and it looks like it's a deponent verb, why don't you see if the middle-only translation works? And maybe it is truly just a middle verb. However, there are some forms that are passive in form but are deponents. So there are still some obstacles for this new perspective to overcome. There may be a solution to this. Everything's not quite neat and tidy yet. So what I want you to do is to go ahead and use the concept of deponency, but also know that if a verb could be middle, it may just be a middle-only verb. So for now, we're going to straddle the fence a bit until further research comes out and demonstrates one way or another which is most likely correct. Okay, let's practice with some made-up sentences. Luantai hoi douloi hupa ton apostolon. Here's a verb, luantai. It's got this new ending, mai sai tai methisthe entai. So it's third plural, it's present, and it's either middle or it's passive. Present, middle, or passive, indicative. Third plural. Let's go ahead and grab our subject. It's nominative. That's how I know it's a subject. Hoi douloi luantai. So let's say it's middle. The servants loose themselves. The servants loose for themselves, or the servants themselves loose. Let's say it's passive. The servants are being loosed. Okay, so we've got both of those options. Let's look at the rest of the sentence. What we have is an agency phrase. Hupa ton apostolon, by the apostles. When you have an agency phrase, it's going to mean that the verb is passive. So let's mark out middle, and we'll just say it's passive. The servants are being loosed. That's the passive translation. The servants are being loosed by the apostles. Let's look at another example. Paneroi anthropoi doxadzantai. Ala dikaioi anthropoi doxadzusi ton theon. What do you do when the sentence looks a little bit long and you get a little bit scared? Look for punctuation. If you see some punctuation in the middle of the sentence, go ahead and break it up. So let's make it look like this. Break it at the comma. Now all of a sudden I'm not so scared. What I see is a couple of nominatives here that are going to be the subject, and here's going to be my verb. Doxadzantai. Once again, this is third plural. My ersaitai, methus the intai. So it's third plural. It's present. I know it's either middle or passive based on form. Let's take a look at the subject. Paneroi anthropoi. Paneroi is an adjective. It means evil. Anthropoi is a noun. It means men. These are nominative, masculine, plural. Evil men. So now let's put it together. Evil men, if it's middle, the verb means glorify. So evil men glorify themselves. Evil men glorify for themselves. Evil men themselves glorify. Well, that could make some sense. Evil men glorify themselves. We know that's certainly true. How about passive? Evil men are being glorified. Well, that also could make some sense. So what are we going to do? Keep going. Let's look at the rest of the sentence, see if it provides any further help. Allah, but. Then we have another couple of nominatives and another verb. And this is going to be an accusative direct object. So on our verb, doxadzusi, it's from the same verb, doxadzo, I glorify. This one is present active indicative because of the usi ending, o-ase, amen eti usi. This one is also third plural, present active indicative, third plural. Now it's a good habit to have what I call a Greek cheat sheet that you use when you're working on homework and on translations for Bible studies and sermons. And on that cheat sheet, you should have the endings. You should have the number 1 endings, o-ase, amen eti usi. You should have the number 2 endings, nu, sigma, movable nu, mente, nu, or son. You should have the number 3 endings, my, ersai, tai, methus, the, entai. If you have this as a handy reference, you can remember, oh yeah, that usi ending is part of the number 1 endings. Now obviously you can't use that on a quiz or a test because you don't use anything except your God-given brain and all the hard work you've put in. But you should use it when you're doing homework, and you should do it when you're translating. So we know that verb is present active indicative, third plural. They glorify. Now let's pick up our nominative subject. Dikaioi anthropoi. That's another adjective with a noun. Righteous men. So righteous men glorify. Then here's our accusative direct object, ton theon. Righteous men glorify God. So does that help us? We have evil men glorify themselves, if it's middle. Evil men are being glorified, if it's passive. But righteous men glorify God. I think, honestly, either one could work. If you stick with the parallel elements where you have a direct object, then maybe taking it as a middle where it's glorifying themselves, you have that kind of built-in direct object idea. Maybe that would work. But honestly, you could say evil men are being glorified, passive, but righteous men glorify God. So when you have two legitimate options, put at least one. And then how would you parse it? Well, however you translate it's how you parse it. If you put a legitimate option, I'm happy, I'm going to count it as correct. Let's try another example. Hi pistai erkentai, kai baptizantai hupaton apostolon. Couple of verbs, erkentai and baptizantai. Erkentai is from erkomai. Remember, it has this omai ending, and so this is a deponent. The verb means I come. So here, this one is third plural. They come. Remember, a deponent is middle or passive in form, but active in meaning. And if you go with the new scholarship, it's just middle only, so you would just say it's middle and still translate it the same way, they come. So this is our nominative subject, hi pistai. This is the adjective blank. The adjective blank. So it's not modifying a noun, it's acting like a noun. We call that a substantival adjective. The faithful what? Well, it's feminine and it's plural. So we're going to add the word women because it's feminine and it's plural. The faithful women come, kai, and baptizantai hupaton apostolon. This is from baptizo, I baptize. This is this new one of these number 3 endings. It's either middle or passive. Look over here. I do have an agency phrase. Hupaton apostolon. So it's okay for your eyes to look to the right, look to the left, and see if you have an agency phrase. And if you do, you don't have to go through all the motions. Just jump to, okay, it's going to be passive. So let's translate it as passive and see if it makes good sense. If not, well, then we'll back up. If it's passive, they are being baptized, hupaton apostolon, by the apostles. Yeah, that makes very good sense. They are being baptized by the apostles. So put it all together. The faithful women come, and you could either say are being baptized, or if you want to repeat the subject that's built in, you could. And they are being baptized by the apostles. So how would I parse these? Well, erkentai we said is a deponent. So we're going to say present, deponent, indicative, third plural from erkomai, I come or go. And again, if you want to be more specific, earn some rewards in Greek heaven, if there is such a thing, you put middle/passive deponent. But I'll be happy with either one. Now how about baptizantai? Present. We said it was passive, indicative, third plural from baptizo, I baptize. It's not a bad idea to write these down as you go. I know it doesn't always click in your mind, but you are making these decisions whether you write them down or not. You just have to tell your mind what you're actually doing and force your mind to tell your pencil to put it on paper. Let's take a look at some more examples. These are actual New Testament examples. Matthew 11:5, nekroi egairontai. This is from egairo, I raise or rise. And nekroi is an adjective. It's a substantival adjective here. Dead men or dead ones or dead people. This is passive. Are being raised. Nekroi egairontai. Ego, baptizomai. This is from baptizo, I baptize. This is that o my ending, so it's middle or passive. In context, it's passive, so it's translated, I am being baptized. Luke 16:16. He basileia tu theou euangelizatai. The kingdom of God, and then the verb, is being preached. So a few passive examples. Now let's look at some examples of deponents or some middles. A common phrase in the Gospels, hade Jesus apokrinatai autois. But Jesus, or now Jesus, or simply Jesus, answers them. So this is from apokrinomai, I answer. It's either deponent, if you believe in such a thing, or it's middle only. So you translate it as active. Jesus answers them. Romans 9:1, the beginning of this long section, 9 through 11, on the destiny of Israel. Paul is very disturbed for ethnic Israelites who are not believing the gospel. And if you don't believe the gospel, regardless of your ethnicity, you don't get in. The argument from Romans is it's all about faith. The argument from Jesus himself. You want some children of Abraham? I can make some children of Abraham out of these rocks. So it's by faith. You have to believe. So Paul says, Alethean lego in Christo ou pseudomai. I speak the truth in Christ, ou pseudomai. This is from pseudomai. It's a deponent. I lie. It's negated by ou, so it's I am not lying. Then Paul continues that long section. Now, by the way, it's very attractive for us to want to believe in universal salvation, that everybody will be saved. It sounds nice. Unfortunately, it's not what the Bible says. And Paul, who is so disturbed that some of his kinsmen won't believe the gospel and will perish forever, and he's even willing, in a hypothetical situation, to forfeit his own salvation so that they could be saved. If there were no such thing as hell, eternal destruction, why would Paul be so disturbed? Because he knows everybody would just be saved. Of course, that's not what the New Testament teaches. It teaches that there is going to be eternal destruction. Another one from 1 Corinthians 16. That verb aspazomai means I greet. So this one is third plural, that entai ending. So they greet. Well, who's the subject? It's hai ekklesiai. The churches greet. The churches of Asia greet humas. The churches of Asia greet you. So that's another deponent, or middle only, depending on your perspective. Here's one with erkomai, that means I come or I go. Erketai he orge tu theou. The wrath of God is coming. That's third singular, erketai. He orge is the subject, the wrath. The wrath of God is coming. And another use of erkomai, kai idu. Erkomai taku. And behold, that's that word idu, and behold, erkomai taku. This is the end of Revelation. Behold, I am coming quickly. One of the most common points from all of the New Testament's eschatological teaching, we must be ready, and we must be ready now.